Hi guys, thank you so much for tuning in. It's Hila here from Saturday Night Stitch and welcome to the second episode of the Saturday Night Stitch podcast. Now today I have a real treat for you in store. I have my friend Josie Magoola who blogs over at itisjosie.com, and she has agreed to come onto the podcast to talk about her experience sewing with a Burda pattern for the first time. So join me in welcoming Josie to the podcast. Hey Josie.
Hey Hila.
How's it going?
It's good. It's a bright day outside and I'm seated under the sun and it's so brilliant. Feels nice. I feel alive.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So we've been really lucky that we've had some sunshine today on the day that we're recording the interview, which I am eternally grateful for.
Which is good.
And thank you so much for agreeing to come onto the podcast and to share your experiences with us.
Thank you, Hila, for having me here. I wouldn't miss it for anything.
Right. So for those of us who are not familiar with you or your wonderful Instagram profile, do you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Josephine Magoola. That's why, aka Josie. I love sewing. Yeah, I think if you're Hila's friend, you must love sewing. But yeah, my experience with sewing, I grew up watching my mom sew. She used to work, and sewing was a part-time business. She used to make a few pieces she used to sell. And I remember in my house there was a Singer manual sewing machine, which wasn't quite the friendly one. I was quite so short. I started sewing at 8. I don't want to say I started sewing, but I first used the sewing machine at 8.
Wow.
I would try to anchor myself on the table so I could get the feet down. What do they call that?
The treadle.
The treadle, to try and move the treadle as I sewed. I could hardly reach, but I would manage to do anything, something, at least repair a few torn clothes. Yeah, and growing up in Africa, it was normal to repair torn clothes. Yeah.
Wow, so you started sewing when you were 8 on a vintage Singer sewing machine, no
yes.
less. Wow, that's really fantastic. I'm kind of going through a vintage sewing machine phase at the moment. And, you know, I'm scared of even looking at those treadle machines. So, you know.
I think the difference between my vintage and yours is a vintage electric machine. Mine was a manual machine. So I'm not sure whether they still match. Or mine might have been the more vintage than your vintage one.
Quite possibly, yeah. But I have seen some of the treadle machines, but I've just been like, I'm not yet at that stage where I can tackle those. But that's really wonderful. So what made you start blogging about your sewing makes?
I think after that I picked on to sewing again. Honestly, after the time I tried using a sewing machine, my mom stopped sewing, so I never went back to it again until 10 years ago that I actually had a dream sewing, and I was happy about the dream, and I decided to buy a sewing machine. And I started off, I was still back home in Africa, and I started off with making cushion covers. I didn't know where this would take me. Then moved to the England, Manchester by then. I was amazed being at home with a newborn and not having much to do with myself that I resorted to sewing. I remember moving into Abakan, picked up a pattern for the very first time. I didn't know what to do with it. I would open it up, close it up, put it back in an envelope and not do anything with it.
I can relate to that, absolutely.
Until one time, I think 2012, I put together all my courage, cut into a sewing machine, and I sewed up a skirt. I think it's a simplicity skirt. It was far from perfect, but it's a wearable piece.
Well done is better than perfect.
That's how Hila keeps telling me that. Yeah.
You were there and you just had a young child, and you were looking for an outlet for your creativity.
Yes.
So how then, at what point did you decide that you were going to start itisjosie.com?
Yeah. In all honesty, I sewed a bit from that time of Manchester. I can't say I was consistently sewing. I could sew here and there mostly. Actually, I got caught up sewing baby diapers. I cloth diapered my son, so I was making cloth nappies for my son, and that's all I could do. Then coming along, I remember about 2 years ago is when I was amazed by the wonderful ladies who sew their clothes on YouTube. I watched the many seamstress tags that they were on YouTube, and I realized actually people do sew their clothes. And it's from there that I've started sewing, coming to 2 years, and I've not looked back. And when you look at how much goes on in the sewing community, and I was like, oh, why don't you blog about your sewing? And with great encouragement from my friend Hila, I realized actually it's not the hardest thing to do. And yes, I said it is josie.com, which I'm thrilled about. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so the burning question that I have been dying to ask you about sewing with Burda for the first time is, was it hard to sew with Burda?
In all honesty, it was doable. I wonder why it has taken me this long. And I remember buying my first Burda style magazine in 2011.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when was the first time you came across Burda style?
I think there was the sewing community, some sewing forum that used to be online, and they used to talk about how you get a Burda style magazine and it has so many patterns, about 25. But in all honesty, when I got it and looked at it, I was like, these many patterns, you can hardly pick out one. So I always opened them, built up the courage, but never followed along.
So this was 2011. 2011.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to point out that it's now 2019. Exactly 8 years.
8 years.
Is my maths correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so it took you 8 years to get the courage to finally sew a Burda magazine. Okay.
And I stressed out 3 pieces last year, 2018, which were never sold up until last week when I actually cut through one and sold it up. And I realized it's doable actually. I was limiting myself. Do you know when you tell yourself, oh, this is a maze of a pattern, who goes through all this? And actually when you sit down and identify your pattern size and trace around it with a highlighter, you get to realize that actually your focus should be on this one piece that you should sew up, and it's doable actually, surprisingly.
That is wonderful. So I would love for you to talk us through the process of the pattern. And by the way, Josie today is actually wearing the Burda top that she made. So tell us about the top and your fabric selection, and then talk to us about the process.
The process, yeah. I'm wearing a top from the March issue 2019 of Burda. It's a summer top. I think it was number 103, and it's a free summery top that comes with a belt that you can put together with a belt loop. But I couldn't.
The pattern details will be in the show notes down below as well.
That would be nice. And I chose fabric. I went to Fabrics for All, where I joined their bloggers network, and I was gifted this beautiful fabric. I looked at the wonderful fabrics they stock there, and I got a cotton fabric which feels like a viscose. It's actually lightweight. I think it feels like a cotton lawn. What does it feel like?
Well, I felt like it's a cotton viscose mix, because it's got the light drapiness of viscose, but it's also quite it holds pleats. So I kind of think that it might be a viscose cotton, but don't quote me on that.
It's a beautiful red fabric, perfect for the weather. It actually makes me smile when I see myself in the mirror wearing it. And I chose this fabric because I'd seen the pattern and I knew it needed something lightweight, but also something that will bring out the pattern, and it has these gorgeous patterns. It's actually a beautiful top. The pattern is beautiful and the fabric is beautiful. I feel nice in it.
Yeah, and it is. It's a very stunning top, because now I've also made this same pattern, but I used a Cloud 9 fabric, which is very it's got an ivory background and these faded out brush strokes, so it's quite light and pale.
I think I love yours too. It's a beautiful top.
I love yours, because yours, you've gone for the deep red background, and it's got like these flowers, and so it's quite it's a very vavavoom, fabric, and you've styled it with the black jeans, obviously, which just brings out the contrast even more. But so you had traced 3 patterns previously from some of the 2018 issues.
You're right.
So what was it about this one that made you skip those pre-traced patterns and start tracing again to sew your first Burda pattern?
I remember I was chatting with Hila. I was telling her, "Oh, at least I've gotten my foot into the Burda style magazines. I've dressed up 3 patterns." She's like, "Looking at the mountain doesn't mean that you've climbed the mountain." I remember she made such an analogy, and And it was so funny, like, no, you can't say you've done anything with Burda style magazines, you've only traced them. So I was like, okay, let me prove it to myself that I'm ready to step in. I traced off one. I was like, choose a pattern that's not complicated, that doesn't call for any closures, one that will be straightforward, that you won't miss anything. But trust me, even when you look at that, you can still make mistakes, because I forgot and I added seam allowance on the fold line. So
was this on the back piece or the front piece?
On both. I did it on both. That's how good I was. Do you know, because it's not a clear pattern that's like your usual patterns that are clearly marked out, and you never need to add a seam allowance to your ordinary patterns. So it's something to look out for, that when you trace a pattern, you actually have to read and write fold, and if it helps to add the fold line diagram onto the pattern size, it helps you know that when you're adding seam allowance, you don't need to add any on that.
Okay, so I'm quite curious, when you traced your pattern, did you add the seam allowances afterwards, or you added the seam allowance as you were tracing?
I added the seam allowances after tracing.
Okay. All right.
Which was straightforward. I know Hila was showing me a method, but I was like, no, let me stick to this one. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly a good way to go. So I think that that's actually really great advice for anybody who is apprehensive about sewing with Burda, that you start off with a pattern that doesn't have a lot of complicated things to it,
That's
no closures.
Yeah.
And the style that you're wearing, it doesn't even have any darts. You know?
It doesn't actually. Yeah.
Okay, so then how did you get on? At what point during the process did you realize that you'd added the seam allowance incorrectly?
Lucky for me, I noticed before I could cut into my beautiful fabric, because I would have been so angry if I didn't notice it earlier. It's when I looked at it and was like, wait a minute, it's going to go on the fold. And I think what helped is the fact that I'd cut out the seam allowance. I'd added the seam allowance after tracing out, because that was a proper clear line, that actually this is the seam line and this is the seam allowance added. Because probably if I'd added the seam allowance during tracing, I could probably have not noticed that earlier. So it helped that I added the seam allowance after tracing. So I managed to notice it, then cut it off. I hadn't yet cut my pattern. No, I hadn't yet cut the fabric. I was trying to remind myself. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And then, so how did you get on with after that?
After that, I actually went to the traced up papers. And it's actually easy when you know which seam allowance you've used. You get the seam rulers, add it on, reduce that amount at the fold, which was straightforward, and cut into my fabric, which was nice, quite straightforward. And one thing at least I know about Burda style magazines patterns, they don't add a lot of ease like the ordinary big folds that you go cut into. You think you're cutting a size 8 and the size comes out and you wonder if you cut a 12. So with Burda style, what I like about it, they are true to size. Their seam allowance is not extravagant, so which makes it really brilliant.
So what seam allowance did you add to your
I'm always happy to use 5/8 inches, which is 5/8 inches, which is 1.5 centimeters. I feel like it gives me a lot of room should I need to add a little space into it.
Well, I need you to join me in my industrial sewing thing, is because I use a 1/2 inch seam allowance on mine, and I use a 1/4 inch around the necklines and things like that. But yeah, we're gonna try and teach
we shall
you that.
I'll see if I can learn that. Yeah.
Okay, so then you cut into your fabric. How did you find the instructions?
In all honesty, the instructions were okay, because it was a basic pattern that you could sew up even without the instructions if you've sewed up something before. And I'm told that their instructions are not that detailed, but I think it helps to start off with an easier pattern that doesn't call for a lot of instructions, lest you get confused. And when you dig your feet in there, you figure out that you will make it. Actually, the instructions were so clear to follow, because it was a straightforward top. Didn't need to add any dust, didn't need to add any closures. You just needed to finish your seams the way you finished them after sewing.
And how did you feel during the process? Okay, first of all, how long did it take you from tracing to actually finishing it off and being able to put it on and say,
I've got it off?
Yeah.
I would say I'm not a fast sewer, but I think I'm tracking down that my not being a fast sewer, I've got a lot of distractions around me while I'm sewing. I'm probably watching a video on YouTube or on Blueprint.
It's like I said, Josie, I said this in my video last time. I did say that monotasking.
Yes.
I say it again. Monotasking. Yeah.
I think I'm going to join the monotasking. I want to see how fast. Because when Hila tells me that she's able to sew something, a garment, cut it out, sew it in not one sitting. Do you do it in one sitting?
Yeah, I do it in one
so
sitting.
I was telling myself what's different with me, but I guess I'm going to track it down to having a lot going on around me. Even when you would say I'm just listening to an audible book, nothing's distracting me, but my mind, you can't still at the same time read an instruction while you're listening to something and give it your full attention.
Well, I think it definitely depends. So like for me, productivity and efficiency is kind of like one of the things that I'm incredibly passionate about, even before I started sewing. And I think it depends on what your style is, but you can only know your style if you try different things.
That's
so
true.
for me, there was a point where I used to think, oh, I'm multitasking, I'm listening to a YouTube channel, I'm watching a craftsy class back when it was called craftsy whilst I am sewing. But I wasn't being as productive as efficient until I decided to try doing my sewing just as pure sewing without anything else and just focused on it and using the Pomodoro technique. And I found that I could get more done. Which inherently satisfied me and fulfilled my needs, because I've got a super long sewing queue. Like
who doesn't have? Even us who don't write them down like Hila, we have the cues in our brain that we hope we shall remember once we look at the fabric, like, oh, I bought this for this year.
I mean, you've seen what my fabric stash is like, you know.
Let's not get started on that.
Everything in there has got a plan. It has got a plan, you know. So, you know, definitely it's worth trying out different things, but I'm glad that you're bringing up that somehow you're kind of realizing that trying to listen to something else when you're supposed to be sewing, you're kind of thinking that maybe
it drags you on longer. But in all honesty, it didn't take a long time. It was, if I wasn't distracted after I've traced off the pattern in less than 2 hours. Now I'm speaking for people who don't sew very fast. In 2 hours you would have the top ready with you. The tracing process, because I've not done it that fast, that many times, so it's not as fast as I would have loved it to be, but it's not really the hardest thing to do. And given that it was a top, so there were short pieces you're working with, you didn't have long pieces to work with, so it was an easier thing to work with, which was really helpful.
So do you have plans to sew more Burda patterns?
I think I'm now converted. Why would one not sew a Burda magazine pattern? Because the thing is that you think about the one pattern, who doesn't know that sewing patterns cost an arm and a leg if you're going to buy everything you need? And if you can buy this one pattern, I actually don't have a subscription like Hila, because I tried a subscription and I realized actually it comes off cheaper if I walk into my local WH Smith and buy the pattern, and they never run out in my branch in Leeds. I'm not asking everyone to come and buy them out.
That's interesting, because like one of the reasons why I stick to a subscription now is because by the time I saw the previews of what was in a magazine and actually managed to get round to going to a shop, they didn't have any.
That's the thing,
you know, and that was very frustrating for me. And that's when I just decided, I was just like, I'm gonna get a subscription because then that way at least I am guaranteed, because there were at least 2 copies that I missed out on in 2016 when I decided to let my subscription lapse, and I said, oh, I'm going to buy one as it comes. And then I decided I wanted to free up that mental space of trying to make a decision about, do I like the styles enough to buy them, and then making the time to go into town. So that's quite interesting that you feel confident that the shop will have it, because in my experience, they didn't have them when I wanted it.
But my other confidence comes from the fact that if I missed it, I would get a copy from Hila. I would borrow Hila's copy. So I don't want her to cancel her subscription because it's working out to my benefit. Even when I know I shouldn't be buying it, actually it feels nice looking at that pattern when you go back home, looking at the pattern book. I've done a lot of looking through it than sewing with it.
You have quite a few copies of the magazine,
yes,
don't you?
Yes, I've got a few of them, yeah.
How many? Do you know how many you have?
I've honestly lost track because I remember coming back to Leeds about 4 years ago. I had to give out most of the copies I had to a sewing friend back home, because I didn't have a lot of luggage to carry them with me. But I know it's always good to give someone, to bless someone with something. But at this point in life, you're like, I didn't know the value they had. I was like, I feel like going back and getting all of them because I doubt she's sewing with them. But probably next time I'll see her. I might have a chat with her.
Yeah, that's right. So what is your next Burda pattern? What's your next project that you're looking at making?
I was excited to look into my previous copies. I'm sewing up for summer. I saw some pieces in the 2012 issue. I think it was summer. I saw some linen dresses. I've got the linens with me. Just like we've said, we have fabrics and they're all planned. They've got a plan. So that would be the idea of my plan for summer sewing. But I'm actually excited so much more from the Burda Style magazines. And I saw the lines drawing from the June issue, June issue to come June 2019, and it has so many fabulous pieces.
I love that. I am so
I just
torn.
Can't wait for it to come here. So it might be my next make from that magazine. Yeah.
Oh no, that's wonderful. So, do you remember which one specifically that caught your eye?
I like the dress with the side buttons.
I love that. It's like a red linen
dress. Yes. Yeah. It has big buttons on the sides.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful one. Then I saw, there were honestly so many pieces. I was seeing it through Saturday Night Stitches, Hila's YouTube. When she was going through them, I was like, ooh, I need to get my hands on this. But I know the advantage of having a subscription, you get to get the magazine before it's in the shops. Because I know by the time I get mine from the shops, it's when I've known whatever is in the pieces, but it helps to still have one.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I have the German subscription. So I get that a lot earlier than the English one. But that's because I very rarely use instructions. So I quite like it. I actually like the German magazine a lot better than the English.
Does it have any difference? Are the patterns different?
No. The patterns are exactly the same. But I find that with the German issue, it's actually got a lot more extra articles in it. So it's more than So
does that mean you understand the German?
I have been learning. I've been picking up quite a fair amount of sewing German. And so it's been a lot of fun as well, but for the most part I only ever use instructions when it's a really unique design and I can't figure out how it is. But
then I don't think I'll be borrowing yours because I don't think I can speak the other language I speak is French. If it was French, I would have my Guate, but not German. So I don't think I'll be borrowing Hila's. I'll be buying mine from HW.
Well, don't worry, pretty soon you will stop to rely on instructions because Burda, bless them, I love the magazines. I'm a big fan. I'm a collector. I'm a completist. But their instructions, if they're not for somebody who wants to have their hand held. But having said that, there are only so many ways that you can sew a dress. You have to do the darts before you attach it to the waistline. You can.
And I think if you've had your gut sewing with different patterns, really, you can still figure out how to do something. That's how hacking comes along, that you can hack something because you've made something in a particular way. So I can add an elastic, an elasticated waist to a dress because you've sewn a dress the button from till it and the button. So you can carry on the same instructions, use them with another dress and still create something. So I guess it's doable even without having to go through the instructions.
Okay, so I like how you're saying that it is doable. That's such a great word. So I have a question for you. I am wondering if there was one thing that you would have wished you knew before you started on the Burda project for your first Burda pattern. Yeah.
In all honesty, if there was anything to learn, it wasn't this time. Because the hardest part, I think, for anyone with Burda style magazines, it's tracing. Which I had done 3 times last year of the patterns I dressed out that I never sold, as I felt like I'd conquered the Burda style world with just tracing 3 patterns. But I was convinced that I was just almost there, but not yet there. Yes. So I think whatever I had to learn was from the first time I traced out the patterns, having to look at the line drawing in the instructions to figure out which page you have to go to and which color code you have to find, and on top of that your size. I think that's when I had to learn, and when I traced about 3, at least I figured out how you navigate around that maze to find your pattern that you need.
So did you find that tracing got easier, or would you say it's just about the same level?
Definitely, it gets actually easier. You just need to trace your very first one. When you look at it, you would wonder where your pattern is, but when you actually focus on the pattern number you're looking for and the color you're looking for, you're surprised at how much actually, if you know what you're looking out for and you've identified what you should look out for, how easy it is to see it. I don't know whether that makes sense, but
no, it does. It absolutely makes sense to me.
So it just helps to go over your pattern size, the pattern you intend to trace out with the highlighter. You highlight it out so it's evident too that you can't make a mistake and trace something different.
So did you use a highlighter with this pattern?
Yes, I used the highlighter over the pattern piece I intended to trace out, so it was straightforward that should I move away and come back after a few days, you still know where to go to.
Okay, so like I'm a Burda purist, which means that I would never put a highlighter on my pattern sheets. So I just have to say that when I loan you my books, please don't use a highlighter on my pattern sheets.
I'll try not to use the highlighter. I'll try to remind myself that they are Hila's books, not mine.
Well, yeah, because I don't use a highlighter, and that's mostly because, you know, there is a roaring trade for Burda style magazines on eBay, so like you can resell Burda magazines, and in fact,
that I know I should stop here.
And I'm trying to complete, so I have 2018 the full 12 issues, 2017 the full 12 issues, and I've just recently managed to complete my 2016 collection, and I'm now trying to complete my 2015, so I'm constantly searching on there, but I don't want pattern sheets that have highlights on them.
Maybe one thing Hila might have left out, there are issues that she has double bought. That's how bad she has gotten with it. She has 2 issues of a particular, she forgets that she owns one and buys another.
Yeah, but I'm getting better at tracking those, because I've, you know, when I organized everything, I now have, you know, the numbers of the missing ones. So now I double check before I go and buy. Okay, so tips for somebody who's sewing for the first time with Burda, what advice would you give them?
In all honesty, what's not to love about a Burda style magazine? I buy mine for just £6, and I have about 25 patterns to trace out. Let it be that you only identify one pattern that you would want to sew. It's still a bargain. At £6, you're buying that one pattern. What if you identify 3 or 4? It's a steal. You're getting 4 patterns for £4, I mean for a total of £6. And also one thing I like about the Burda style magazine patterns, they are fashion forward. If you're one who likes something interesting, you know, the ordinary patterns probably that have been in print for the last 10 years, and you want something fashion forward, I think Burda style offers that to anyone who loves to sew something that's in style. It's fantastic.
And is there any advice in terms of the process, anything that you could share with somebody who's listening, who's thinking, oh, you know, I wanna try that? What's the one thing you would say to them to help them along the way?
I'll use the one word Hila loves to tell me: don't overthink it. It's actually an easy thing. Don't overthink it. It's actually very easy. You'll be surprised. If you trace off the first one, you'll be surprised at how fast it comes and how easy it is. It's actually easy. I'm not speaking from that. I'm not speaking because I finally made one, but it's an easy way of tracing off patterns. It's easy to make patterns from the Burda style magazines.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one great thing that I have learned and I try to implement in my sewing is to just act before I think. Because when I think too much, I tend to let projects marinate, and then there's like a lot of overthinking. So I'm just kind of like act before I think with the sewing. I mean,
is that why you trace them off as soon as you buy it? You trace it off, and then she has, in our confession, she has more traced off patterns than anything.
Well, this is true, because like the tracing part, strangely enough, I know a lot of people see the magazine pattern sheets and they feel like, oh my gosh, I can't get through. But the tracing part is actually quite easy. Well, at least I find it very easy, but it's sort of like the going forward and then cutting out and all that. But you know, it's so much fun. Okay, so Josie, thank you so much for I've had so much fun talking about Burda patterns.
Thank you, Hila, for having me over.
Okay, and so thank you guys. So that's it for I hope that you've really enjoyed the podcast and that you've gotten some insights into somebody who finally got round to sewing with Burda. And I think, Josie, I just thought of the perfect caption for this podcast title, and it is better late than never.
Yes.
Because, you bought your first Burda magazine in 2011.
Yes, that's right.
And then you sewed it up 2019.
Better late than never. I'm glad I held on to those few magazines that encouraged that you can make something from it. At least I know it's doable, and I'm not going to stop. I still buy them. I've not missed an issue since last year. I think September. I have all those issues. I've not missed any. I leave out the October magazines because they're more expensive. If it's £10 and I can get a bud at £6, why not? So at least I buy those ones all the time, even when I've not sewn anything from it. At least now I know there are patterns I can still go back to and make something from.
Absolutely. And that's fantastic. It's one of the things that I love about the Burda patterns. Well, thank you for sharing your process, your trials and tribulations of sewing with Burda, and hopefully you feel inspired to give it a go as well. And if you haven't already, do check out Josie. She's just started a blog called itisjosie.com, and all of the links are in the show notes below. And she's also on Instagram, and you're currently participating in Me Made May for the first time.
Yes, it's my second time.
Oh,
but last
time
I just posted pictures. I didn't understand what was going on. It was my first year into sewing. I just get along. Do you know, it's always nice to join the bandwagon and go along and see where it leads you, and like, oh, it's not a bad idea after all.
Well, her Instagram feed for Me Made May is on fire, so do go and check it out. Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and
thank you for listening.
And so from Josie and I, have a fantastic day, and